And if you're not there or turning there, go to the book of 3rd John, where we will finish out today. John's epistles here will be at the last half of the book of 3rd John. And today we're going to be talking about pride. We're going to be talking about spiritual pride. Really, the desire to be first, the desire to be preeminent, the desire to want to be first. Let me read it for you just again so we can put it in our minds. We're going to be in 3rd John. We're going to start in verse 9. And we're going to go all the way through the end of the chapter at verse 15. John says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. For this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does. He unjustly accuses us with wicked words, and not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brethren either. And he also forbids those who desire to do so and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. The one who does good is of God. The one who does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself, and we add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had many things to write to you, but I am not willing to write them to you in pen and ink. But I hope to see you shortly, and we will speak face to face. Peace be with you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends by name. So again, we're going to talk about pride today. We're going to talk about the stance of wanting to be first. And part of our human nature is to exalt ourself. That is part of the human nature, to exalt ourself. We desire to be at the very top. This is part of our fallen nature. We want to be the greatest. We want to be the one that stands atop, apart from all others. We want to be prestigious. We want to be the illustrious ones. We want to be famous. We want to be notable. We want to be superior. We want to be in positions of authority. We want to be the boss, preeminent. To borrow the sort of vernacular of 3rd John here, we want to be first. That's what that term means, to be first. It's part of our human nature. We saw this in the garden. When Eve was tempted to have the knowledge of God, to have that superior knowledge, she fell. We saw this at the Tower of Babel. We're kind of studying this in our Old Testament survey. We saw this at the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. What did man want to do for himself? He wanted to exalt himself. He wanted to exalt his own name. He wanted to be preeminent. Man wants the preeminent name. They wanted to exalt themselves to the level of God. And man has always desired this. Man, this isn't anything new. Man has always desired to be superior, to be supreme. This is part of our nature. And when you sort of do a scan of the entire Old Testament throughout human history, the entire Old Testament is replete with people trying to elevate themselves to achieve positions of power, to achieve positions of authority, preeminence. Many kings in the Old Testament did this. And what's even worse is people do whatever it takes to stay in positions of power. This is what we do. Man has always loved power. They've always loved prestige. And they've always loved the high places. And they will do what it takes to get there, and they will do what it takes to stay there. And there are many people throughout the Old Testament that really exemplify this sort of wicked superiority. But there's one in particular that I want to kind of highlight for us as sort of an example to show you just what people will do to stay in positions of power. And this is going to relate a lot to what John is talking about today. So let me show you an example. Go to Matthew chapter 2. I want to show you just what people will do, what they're willing to do to stay in positions of power. They will do whatever it takes. This is sort of the pride of men. Now, in Matthew chapter 2, let me just kind of give you a little context here. Jesus is born at this point. He's just being born. And at this time, Rome has appointed a king over the land of Judea. Verse 1 says that. And this man His name is Herod, and he is not a Jew himself. But what history tells us is the Roman government appointed this man named Herod over Judea, which is the southern part of Israel, and that's where Bethlehem is. That's where Jesus was born. So this Roman government has appointed this man named Herod to be the king of the Jews. He is the king of Judea. And history also tells us that at some point, this man named Herod, he petitioned the Roman Senate at this time to be called officially the king of the Jews. That's the title he wanted, because he's the king of Judea, right? So he wanted to petition the Roman government to be called the king of the Jews, and history tells us that Rome approved. The Roman Senate approved. So this man Herod is now called the king of the Jews. That's his title. Now, when you study it, Herod was known to be a very anxious man. He's a very fearful man. And what he feared was losing his position of authority. He did not want to be dethroned. Herod would do whatever it takes to keep that title, King of the Jews. Now, we know the story. Jesus is born, right? Who comes and visits? The Magi, right? And why do they come to visit here? Look at verse 1 of chapter 2 here. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, which is the southern part of Israel, in the days of Herod the king, Magi came from eastern Jerusalem saying what? What were they walking around saying? Look at verse 2. Where is he who has been born what? The King of the Jews. So you can start to see kind of where Herod is upset here, because these people came to worship the King of the Jews. And who was that not? That wasn't Herod. They didn't come to worship Herod. Herod, in his own mind, he is the king of the Jews because he's been called the king of the Jews. So in his mind, if a Magi were going to come and worship the king of the Jews, they should be there to worship him. But they didn't. They didn't want to do that. So what was his response? These Magi came to worship the king of the Jews. What was Herod's reaction? Look at verse 3. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. He's angry. He's upset. He's, at this point, irate. Why? Because they came to worship the true King of the Jews, not him. And in verses 4 to 15, he kind of lays out the story here. Herod tells these Magi, hey, when you find this baby Jesus, the one who was born the King of the Jews, let me know where he is. That way I too can go worship him. But we know that's a lie, because it says very clearly in verse 13 that Herod actually wants to kill this baby. So God, in a dream, warns these Magi, don't go back to Herod, just go back home. God also warns Joseph, Jesus' earthly father, do not go, do not stay here. You need to flee to Egypt until Herod dies. Stay in Egypt until he dies, because in verse 13, he wants to kill Jesus. He says he wants to worship him, but he wants to kill him. And when Herod finds out that the Magi never returned to tell him what he asked them to, when he finds out that Joseph has fled to Egypt, look at what he does in verse 16. Then, when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its vicinity from 2 years and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. You see, Herod was so determined to keep his position of power that he would do anything, including murder of all the children, to keep that position of power. This is the heart of man here. And frankly, this is a very typical response from man. Herod was so prideful in his throne, nothing and no one would ever do anything to dethrone him. He did whatever it takes to maintain that position of power, even to the point of doing evil. And again, this is a very typical response, because when you sort of continue on Jesus' ministry, when you get all the way to Matthew chapter 23, Who does Jesus expose as false religious leaders? Remember, doesn't he, Matthew chapter 23, he exposes the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Remember, Jesus is talking to the crowd of people, and he's giving a polemic against the Pharisees and the scribes, saying these guys are false. Don't follow them. Outwardly, they're whitewashed tombs. They look good on the outside, but inwardly they're full of dead men's bones. They're false. Don't follow the scribes and the Pharisees. He's openly telling this to a crowd of people. Don't follow these people. But who were these scribes and Pharisees? They were the religious elites. They were the religious leaders of that time. They're the ones that were revered by men. They're the ones that wanted the high places because they were in high religious authority. The scribes and Pharisees were high in authority, and nobody would ever come to challenge that authority, but Jesus did. And what did they do? Well, if you continue reading in Matthew 26, what did they decide to do? The scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 26:4, they wanted to plot together to seize Jesus to do what? To kill him. They wanted to kill Jesus. Why? Because what did he threaten? Their authority, their positions of power, their influence, their preeminence. They were first amongst the people. They were the people that were considered the most religious. They were the authority in a religious sense to the people. Nobody could challenge that. And when Jesus did, they wanted to kill him. That is a very typical response. Men will do what it takes to stay in power, to get in power, and do what it takes to stay there, even if that means they do evil. We saw this in creation. We see this today. No different. People will do whatever it takes, again, to get to that position. And you hear the sayings all the time in all these self-help books, do what it takes to get there and do whatever it takes to stay there. There really isn't a limit on what people will do to remain first. There is no limit to the human heart of what it means to stay first, to stay preeminent. You can defame others, lie about others, falsely accuse others, maliciously gossip about others. You do this so you can remain first. This is what people do. We've always done this. And that really brings us to the book of 3rd John. Just go back there if you're not already there. So this idea of being first and preeminent, and this idea of staying first and staying preeminent is really what the thrust of this text is today. Remember, we covered last week, 3rd John is about Christian love and hospitality, right? That's what this first part is about. And we, as fellow citizens of the kingdom, we are to support the truth. We are to show hospitality to those who support the truth, missionaries, churches, people. We are to love them. We are to show hospitality. That's what that word means, right, in the Greek, to show hospitality, to show love for strangers. And John began this letter commending a man named Gaius. That's what we talked about last week, right? Gaius was a man who was faithful. He's faithful to the truth. He's faithful to loving the church. He's faithful to showing hospitality to those of the church. He's faithful in loving God, and as a result, he's faithful of loving others. Now, this next part of the epistle, John is going to contrast the goodness and uprightness of Gaius against the wickedness of a man named Diotrephes. That's what he's going to do here. He's going to show us two sides. We saw the goodness and uprightness of a man named Gaius who loves the brother, and now he's going to contrast the wickedness of a man named Diotrephes. And Diotrephes is a man, he really exemplifies church leadership in the prideful sense, in the negative sense. Diotrephes is a man that desires that authority. He desires power. He desires to stay in that power. He desires to stay in that position. And he'll do whatever it takes to stay in that position, even to the point of doing evil against other people of the church. And then in this final portion of the letter, we're going to see John is going to again highlight a man named Demetrius. And he is a good man. Demetrius is a good man here. Kind of serves as an example of who we show hospitality to. That's sort of how he rounds out this letter here, with the kind of the negative about a man named Diotrephes and ending with the positive a man named Demetrius. So with that, let's begin in verse 9. Let's look at verse 9 and 10. We're going to be talking about a man named Diotrephes. John says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. Stop there. So just as John, right after he commends this man Gaius for his righteous behavior to the church, now he's going to censure this man named Diotrephes for his behavior to the church. Now, John is going to really indict Diotrephes here in four different ways. Four ways here. Here's how John indicts Diotrephes. The first way is his prideful ambition. He's going to indict him on his prideful ambition. The second way John is going to indict Diotrephes is his pompous arrogance. You'll see the PAs sort of in line here. The third way he's going to indict him is on his perverse accusations. That's the third way, his perverse accusations. And number four, he's going to indict him on his profane activities. You'll see that really Diotrephes' evil attitudes leads to evil actions. And with that, we see in verse 9 that at some point John wrote a letter here. Because in verse 9, he says, I wrote something to the church. We don't know what that is. We don't have record of this. So at some point, John wrote another different letter to the church. We don't know what it said. We don't know what was on it. But here's what we do know, is that Diotrephes did something with it. We don't know what that is, because it says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first. So we can rightly suspect that this man Diotrephes either threw away, tore up, burnt, whatever he did with this letter from the Apostle John, he got rid of it. He destroyed it. But why did he destroy it? Why would you destroy a letter from the Apostle John himself? Well, he tells you. In verse 9, it's because he loves to be first. This man Diotrephes loves to be first. This is his first indictment. This is his prideful ambition. He loves to be first. Now, that's in the Greek, the way this is constructed, it's emphatic in Greek, which means he really loves to be first. This is his MO in life, is to be first. Now, this word in the Greek here is actually interesting. It's very important. It's only used this one time in the entire New Testament. This word is used one time in the entire New Testament. It carries the idea of wanting the chief seat, right? It has the idea of you wanting to be preeminent. Preeminent means to be utmost. It means to be greatest. This man desires to be the greatest. He loves being preeminent. But what's very interesting about this word is whenever you kind of study the way this word is used, it's only used here. But the root word of this word comes from Colossians 1. Go to Colossians for a minute. Just for a minute, Colossians chapter 1. I want to show you the way this Paul uses this word, and it's really going to highlight the heart of Diotrephes, his pride here. It really cannot be overstated. This root word, philoprotuio, that's the word here. But that word protuio is one of the root words here. And it really comes from Colossians 1. Look at verse 15. Paul is talking about the preeminence of Christ, the greatness of Christ. Here's what Paul says in verse 15. He, Christ, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Christ and for Christ. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Here it is, verse 18. He is also the head of the body, which is the church. And he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have what in everything? Here you should say first place, preeminence, superiority, supremacy, one of those words. Christ alone is the first place. That's the word protuio there in the Greek. That's the same root word as we see in 3 John. He is the preeminence. Christ is the preeminent one. He alone is the preeminent one. He is the first place among everything. But this man, Diotrephes, go back to 3 John, Christ is the preeminent one. He alone is the preeminent one. But this man, Diotrephes, he desires to be in that place. As a matter of fact, he loves it. He loves that place. A place that's reserved only for Christ, because he wants to be the head of this church. But Christ is the head of the body. He is the head of the church. And make a quick note here. Very, very clearly, that is a present tense verb here. Diotrephes loves. That is a condition of his heart. That is a way of life for him. That is the state of his disposition, is to love to be first, to love it. He wants to lord over people. He wants to be preeminent over people. He wants people to follow him. And this is the very center of pride. That is all about not Christ, it's all about yourself. Diotrephes' ministry was all about himself. His leadership role was all about himself. And this is the opposite of what Christ commands, because Christ commands what? Humility, right? Selflessness, lowliness. So this is not Diotrephes. Now, the second sort of indictment that John gives Diotrephes here is his pompous arrogance. He's a very arrogant man. Look at verse 9. Not only does he love to be first, he does not accept what we say. Yours might say he does not welcome us. That's a better translation there. He doesn't welcome us. He rejects us. But notice what he says there. He says us. Who's the us here? Paul's going to make it very clear it's the apostles. In the context here, that means the apostles. John is including himself here. He is rejecting us, the apostles. Because you're going to find out later, he also rejects the brethren. So John's talking about two people, the apostles and the brethren. Diotrephes also rejects the apostles themselves. He says he rejects us. He doesn't welcome us. I would argue that he hates us. But why does he reject them? Why does he reject John and the apostles? Why does he reject the teaching? Because he loves to be what? First. He loves to be first. Remember what Ephesians 2:20 says? What is the foundation of the building of the church? The prophets and the apostles, with Christ as the chief cornerstone, right? So Diotrephes loves to be first, and he likes to stay first. And just like Herod, just like the scribes and the Pharisees, if you threaten their position of authority, they will do whatever it takes to stay there. John is an apostle. John is part of the very foundation of the building of the church, with Christ as the cornerstone. The foundation of the church is built on the prophets and the apostles. John is an apostle. John is a true leader of the church. He's an apostle, a true apostle. As a matter of fact, in John 13:23, it says that John is the most beloved of the apostles. He is the most beloved of the apostles. He is a leader of the church, a true appointed leader by Christ himself. The very foundation of the building of the church. And Diotrephes will not welcome that. Why? Because that threatens his position of authority. He does not accept John and the apostles because that puts him second. He doesn't want that. He does not want that. He did exactly what Herod did. He did the same thing that the scribes and the Pharisees did. As soon as Jesus threatened their position of power, they committed evil acts. And this is exactly what Diotrephes is going to do. He's no different. When you threaten somebody in a position of authority, a position of power, they're going to do all the same thing. They're going to do evil deeds. What did Diotrephes do? Let's look at verse 10. This is what Diotrephes does to stay in power. For this reason, verse 10, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does. What does he do? Here comes indictment number 3, his perverse accusations. This is what Diotrephes does to the people of the church to stay in power. He unjustly accuses us with wicked words. Now, that in the Greek there, it means to speak emptily. It means to speak without merit. You're lying. You're out and out lying. This is you're literally spreading rumors. You're maliciously gossiping. You are spreading false things for the purpose of your own personal gain. You want to do this so you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. You will slander anybody, gossip against anybody in order to get what you are trying to accomplish. And Diotrephes here is trying to accomplish preeminence. He's trying to accomplish being first and staying first. So what do you got to do? You got to create division and dissension. You got to gossip. You have to falsely accuse people. This is exactly what happened to Jesus. Remember in Matthew 26, they had no charge against Jesus. What do they have to do? Matthew 26:59 makes it very clear. The chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus because he threatened their authority over the people. They didn't like that. So they had to accuse him, but they had nothing to accuse him on, so they had to do it falsely. This is the normal human response. They did this to John. Diotrephes did this to the local church. He brought foolish, malignant, empty accusations, all for his own sordid gain, so he could be first and remain first. These are his perverse accusations against the people. And lastly, John indicts Diotrephes here for his profane activity. You will see that his poor attitude led to his perverse accusations, which are now going to lead to his profane activity. It gets even worse for Diotrephes. But back to verse 10. Not only does he unjustly accuse us with evil or wicked words, false words, and not satisfied with this, he himself does not receive the brethren either. And he forbids those who desire to do so and puts them out of the church. This is a blistering indictment on Diotrephes. His profane activity and all of this, not only does he proudly love being first, it gets so much worse for Diotrephes here. Not only does he proudly enjoy being the boss, he will willfully reject the Apostle John, and he's not satisfied with that. He wants to keep going. It says he's not satisfied. He wants to keep going. Not only does he want to slander the brothers, he wants to go further. He wants to reject the brothers. He wants to forbid them from showing hospitality to other people. That's what he's forbidding here. The context is about hospitality, showing love for others. Verse 10 makes it very clear. He forbids those who desire to do so. And then he wants to throw them out of the church. That word ekbalo in the Greek doesn't mean just to simply put them out. That means to literally throw them out. He wants to throw them out of the church. This is the type of leader, beloved, that sows discord. This is the type of leader that seeks to divide the church. He wants to divide people. Remember that. He wants to divide the people. And why does he do this? Because he does whatever it takes for him to stay first. This is pride. Anyone and anything that goes against him, anybody that challenges authority, anybody that questions his lordship over the people, Diotrephes wants to ekbalo. He wants to toss out. He wants to separate. And if you go against his rules, if you go against his supposed authority, he throws you out. He forbids you from showing love and hospitality to others. And if you do show hospitality against his wishes, he seeks to throw you out. This is the kind of leader that desires people to follow them. They want people to follow them, not Christ. He wants to do this for sort of gain. Diotrephes wants to be served. Dave said earlier, you read the qualifications of a deacon. Deacons are not to be served. Pastors and elders are not to be served. They are to serve the people. This is not Diotrephes here. We are to serve the people. This is exactly when you get to 1 Peter 5, he's talking about shepherding the flock of God. 1 Peter 5 makes it very clear that we are to shepherd God's flock. We are to watch over them. But we don't do it in compulsion. We are to shepherd God's flock. And this goes for the deacons as well. We are to shepherd God's flock, not because you have to. There's no compulsion here. You shepherd God's flock because it says in 1 Peter 5:2, because you are willing to. Because God wants you to. But you don't do it for dishonest gain. You don't do it to be served. You do it to eagerly serve the people. And you are not to lord over them as what was trusted to you, but by living and being examples to the flock. So the deacons, the elders, the pastors, the leadership, we are to be examples for the flock. It says there very clearly, we are to be examples of the flock that are among you. We don't stand separated from the flock. We stand among the flock. We are with the flock. That's what a leader does. We're to be an example. This is not Diotrephes. Diotrephes has the wrong heart. He's got the wrong motives, because what is his motive? Himself, his own preeminence. People like Diotrephes, they do not welcome fellow brothers and sisters. He does not show them hospitality. He wants to cause division and discourse within the church, within the body. That's what these people do. I want to make a very quick note before we move on. If you notice, and I sort of picked this up about as I was studying it, something very important about this man Diotrephes that's important to note. When you look back at verse 9, it says that he loves being first. We sort of made note of this earlier. That's a present tense verb. So anytime we are studying the scripture and you notice this kind of present tense, that means it's habitual, it's continual, it's an ongoing thing. So in verse 9, he loves being first in the present tense. In verse 9, it says he does not accept us. He does not welcome us. That's also a present tense verb. So he continually doesn't welcome John. He continually rejects him. Verse 10, he says, this is the things he does. That's a present tense verb. This is something he always does. And what does he always do? He's always accusing, present tense. He's never satisfied, another present tense. He does not receive the brother, present tense. He forbids people, present tense. He throws people out of the church, present tense. Present tense verbs here, all of them. This is a pattern of this man's life. This is this is his lifestyle. This is continual, unrepentant action by Diotrephes. He's in a suspected area of church leadership, but this is the constitution of this man's heart, is to reject people, reject John, reject their teaching, throw people out and forbid them to be Christians and practice their Christianity. And again, he does all of this so he can remain first. Now, God has something to say about people like Diotrephes. And I think it's important that we get an idea of what God says about these kind of people. Turn over to Proverbs 6 for a minute. Just for a minute, we'll come right back. Proverbs is right after Psalms. God has very particular words for people like Diotrephes here. And one thing you're going to learn about Solomon's words here is they get right to the point. What does God say about people like Diotrephes? Look at Proverbs 6. Look at verse 16. One thing that's very important at this church here is understanding the attributes of God. There are many people that would tell you that the God that they serve does not hate because you serve the wrong God. There are things that God does hate, and he's going to tell you exactly what he hates here. Look at verse 16. It says there are 6 things which the Lord hates. Doesn't say dislike, doesn't say frowns upon, he hates it. Yes, 7 which are an abomination to him. What are they? Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, a hand that sheds innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and the one who spreads division or strife among the brothers, among the church. Among the church. Diotrephes, that word haughty eyes there, that's pride. And this exemplifies Diotrephes, does it not? Diotrephes pretty much fulfills almost all of these. He has haughty eyes. This is his pride in wanting to be first. He wants to be preeminent. Diotrephes has a lying tongue. Why? Because he's unjustly accusing people. He's lying. And he's rapidly running to do evil as a pattern of life. Remember all the present tense verbs. This is the pattern of his life. He runs to do evil. That is his goal. He utters false witnesses. He lies against the church, the brothers and sisters of the church, and he purposely seeks to spread division and strife. That's what he wants. And I have to tell you, God hates this. And not only does he hate this, he hates when people do it, and he hates those that do it. Because if you look very clearly at verse 19, he hates a false witness who utters lies, and he hates the one who spreads strife among the brothers. He hates those that are in an unrepentant state of dividing his church. And that's exactly what Diotrephes wanted to do. Let's go back to 3 John. So because this man Diotrephes, because he practiced such evil and wicked things against people of the church in his some sort of leadership role in the church, John's going to address him. He's going to address this man and his deeds. Look at first part of verse 10. John would have been very familiar that God hates people and the things that he does, this man Diotrephes. So he says in verse 10, for this reason, if I come, I will call attention to his deeds. So John is going to address this. But there's a couple of exegetical notes I want to make because I think the NIV captures this the best. The NIV says, not if I come, but when I come. That is the best translation here. So in the Greek, in this particular construction, it's a third-class condition. But in this particular construction, in this particular context, it is right to render that not if I come, but when I come. There is a certainty here. John will absolutely address this. There is no potential here. That's why we can say the best translation in this particular context is when I come. John is coming. And why is he coming? He wants to call attention to his deeds. Now, and again, the English doesn't really capture this very well because when you call attention to your deeds, that seems very mild. That doesn't quite capture the mood here. What John is, this is sort of an idiom, really. What he's saying is I'm going to publicly take Diotrephes to task. That's what he's saying here. I will publicly reprimand him to the fullest. This is a statement of public attention. I will call attention outwardly to his deeds. He is going to publicly set the record straight. Because if you'll notice, in verse 10, he says, when I come, I will call attention to his deeds, which he does. And he makes it very clear that he is unjustly accusing us. John includes himself there. He doesn't say he's unjustly accusing you alone. He's also unjustly accusing me. So Diotrephes is unjustly also accusing the apostle himself. So John is absolutely going to address this publicly in a very strong way when he comes back to those he's writing. Now, one thing you'll notice, he never publicly says how he's going to address Diotrephes. He doesn't get into any detail on what he's going to do. And when you kind of look at our human nature, one would like to ask, well, John, what is it you're going to do when you see him? We would naturally want to know that. But he doesn't give any detail on how he's going to publicly address Diotrephes, and I think that's on purpose. I think there's an important reason for this. The reason why John doesn't get into the specific sort of nitty-gritty details about how he's going to deliver this sort of diatribe against Diotrephes, he wants to keep order. John wants to keep order in the church. He's not going to entertain. He's not going to romanticize with Gaius. Remember, he's writing to Gaius here. He's not going to romanticize about what he's going to do to Diotrephes. That's because I believe that that would potentially and inadvertently cause more division in the church. If John is sitting there sort of speaking about disciplinary matters to somebody else outside the church, I believe that could be seen as maybe gossip or create further dissension in the church. I believe he leaves that out for a reason. Because remember, he's writing to a man named Gaius. He wants to commend Gaius. That's the purpose of this letter. He doesn't get into the nitty-gritty details because John is far more concerned with commending Gaius. He's not concerned about Diotrephes in this letter. He wants to explain it. He wants to go over it. But he really wants to make sure that this man Gaius is continuing to do what he is called to do, to walk in truth and to show hospitality. That's why I believe he doesn't get into that sort of nitty-gritty details on how he's going to publicly reprimand Diotrephes, because that might be seen as more church division. So he's telling Gaius, don't worry about Diotrephes. I'll take care of that when I see him. Don't worry about him. Just make sure you are doing what you are responsible for doing. You just take care of what you are called to take care of and do what honors God. And that's how he closes out this letter. Just make sure you are doing what you are called to do. Continue to do what you're called to do. And he ends this letter here with sort of an exhortation to Gaius to continue to show that love and hospitality to a man named Demetrius. So he moves on from Diotrephes, and he ends with this exhortation to Gaius saying, hey, there's a man named Demetrius I want you to continue to show your hospitality to. Look at verse 11 and 12. It says, beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but do what is good. Don't be like Diotrephes. Be you, Gaius. Do what is good. The one who does good is of God. The one who does evil has not seen God. This is what John has been talking about this entire time. All throughout 1 John, he contrasted those who are a child of God and those who are a child of the devil, and they're clear. Right? 1 John, those who are the child of the devil and the child of God are obvious. Do what is good. Imitate God. Do not imitate Diotrephes here. Do not do that. Ephesians 5:1 says for us to be imitators of God, to love God and love others like God. Do not be like this man Diotrephes. He's evil. He practices evil as a pattern of his life. He does not know God. He does not love God. He has never seen God. He is not the one. I want you to continue to show hospitality to this man named Demetrius, verse 12 says. Now, we don't know who this man is. We don't know much about Demetrius. We think it's really probably someone that John has sent Gaius. We don't know who he is. But here's what we do know about Gaius. He is a man of God. Demetrius is truly a man of God. How do we know? Because John says that this man Demetrius has 3 witnesses that testify that this man Demetrius is a man of God. Remember in the Old Testament, we covered this several weeks ago, that when you look at sort of, I think it's in Deuteronomy 19, whenever you're going to make a claim against someone or an accusation of someone in the Old Testament, what did you have to bring that claim? Not 1 witness, but you had to have a minimum of 2 witnesses. But if you had a 3rd witness to testify, that really solidified the veracity of the claim. That really gave you the veracity of the truth. So when you have 3 witnesses, the importance of 3 witnesses in the scripture means it's ironclad. It is truth. There's no denying it. You have three witnesses. You have the testimony of three witnesses. So John tells Gaius about this man Demetrius. Don't be like Diotrephes, but this man Demetrius is who I want you to show hospitality to. And he's such a good man of God. He's got three witnesses that testify to his righteousness. And what are those three witnesses? Look at verse 12. It says, Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. And we add our testimony. And you know that our testimony is true. So what are the three witnesses that this man Demetrius has? Well, first of all, in verse 12, he has the testimony of everyone. It's emphatic. Everyone says that this man Demetrius is just like you, Gaius. He loves the Lord first, and he loves others second. He truly loves others, and everybody will testify to that. This is exactly the testimony that they gave back in verse 3 of Gaius. They all testified that Gaius is a man of God, and they're doing that same thing here to Demetrius. The first witness is everybody. We all testify that this man Demetrius is a good man. The second witness is truth itself. Who is truth? God is truth, right? Holy Spirit is truth. Christ is truth. So it says very clearly in verse 12, and from the truth itself. God testifies that this man Demetrius is a man of God. He practices righteousness. And the third testimony comes from the apostles themselves. Verse 12 says, and you know that our testimony is true. What is the testimony? We add our testimony about this man named Demetrius. So everybody testifies that this man Demetrius is a man of God. And those are the ones we are to show hospitality to. That's what he's telling Gaius here. And that is the sort of the main thrust of this letter, a love for strangers, love for fellow believers. Gaius was faithful. Diotrephes was power hungry. He was preeminent hungry. And this man Demetrius was worthy of hospitality. In case the sort of application here isn't clear at this point, these are the ones that we are especially to show hospitality to. We show hospitality to everyone except for those who would willfully and maliciously pervert the gospel of Jesus Christ. He makes that very clear back in 2 John. But we are to show hospitality to our neighbors, to those we love, and especially to those that are faithful to the truth. And in typical Johannine fashion, he emphasizes the importance of personal fellowship, face-to-face fellowship. This is such an important part of our Christian walk, is that we have face-to-face fellowship. That's why Dave and I are talking. We mentioned men's and women's dinners and lunches and activities, because face-to-face communion with each other, fellowship with each other, is an essential part of our Christian walk to cultivate relationships with each other. You know, we have to understand God is so gracious and merciful that he never asked us and he never required us to do our Christian walk alone. We have each other. We have each other to pray for. We have each other to bear each other's burdens, to help each other, show hospitality to each other, provide for each other. You don't have to do it alone. Look at verse 13. He said, I have many things to write to you, but I'm not just going to write it to you. I want to see you. I don't want to write in pen and ink, but I hope to see you shortly. I want to speak to you face to face. I want to be with you. Peace be with you. The friends greet you, and greet the friends by name. That's personal. That's the closeness that the apostles desire for all of us. And we don't come to church to check it off our box. We come to church because we want to worship God first, and we want to love each other second. We, believe it or not, we are a family. We're part of unity in God. We are one faith, one baptism, one Christ, one Lord, one body. Whether you're a Calvinist or an Arminian, it doesn't matter. We are one body by one faith. We are to love each other. We are to love each other. So this concludes our letters of John. Next week we're going to do some Q&As, as Dave talked about. We're going to do some Q&As. And coming up in April, Pastor Dave's actually going to be preaching for us for a little while. Sort of break up the minutia of my voice and my teaching, and we all look forward to that because it will be excellent. What he's going to be preaching on sort of through the Easter season, Passover, things like that. Resurrection. And then after that, probably in May, we're going to begin our next book, which will be First Peter, First and Second Peter. That's where we're going to be going next. So with that, let's pray. Heavenly Father, again, we prostrate ourselves before you in humility and love and thanksgiving. Lord, thank you so much for the depth of these short epistles, but thank you for the depth of its teaching. And Lord, just how important it is to love others. And there's one thing I've personally learned this week is just how deep a love for others can go, and it should go. Lord, I'm thankful very much for your conviction in my heart. I'm thankful very much for the grace that you've shown me and shown all of us, and the mercy that you've shown me. And Lord, I pray that as we continue on as this church, that you would continue to bless this church with your word, with the open, unreserved proclamation of your word, the word that begets life, the word that sanctifies, and the word that is eternally true, who is Jesus Christ. In his name we pray and we give you thanks. Amen.